Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast, where we break down the practical applications of this emerging science, starting with healthy light habits and going wherever the quantum superhighway takes us. This is your host, executive and life coach Meredith Oak, with a quick reminder that podcasts are conversations, not consultations. But if you're looking for one of those, do check out our free practitioner directory at quantumbiologycollective.org.
For those of us who are on the journey to our best life in terms of health, wellness, vitality, energy, healing, all of the things, we necessarily get very focused on the protocols, the tools, the science, the understanding that is required to reach that state of health. However, somewhere along the way, when we have been restored enough to be ready to take action, we need to think about why we want to feel so much better and what it is we want to contribute to the world. And I really believe if you're a person who listens to this podcast and others like it and studies and heals and does all of the things, at a certain point, we have a responsibility to step up and share. In other words, we need to become leaders. And some people are a little afraid of that word. Oh, I'm not a leader. That's like a job title of people who are in charge of a lot of stuff and like boss people around or make big speeches. Not necessarily. There's a lot of forms of leadership, and we talk about them in this conversation that I have today with my special guest, Stephen McGhee, who is a leadership expert. He has been coaching and training people in the leadership space for many decades. He works from a deep intuitive space and understands that we all have a capacity to lead. We just need to be able to find it. And I think that those of us on this journey who are learning what we're learning and knowing what we know, we really do need to think about how we plan to share that and how we plan to connect out and contribute to the world. We are at a time of unprecedented change on every level: economic, technological, ecological, cosmological. There's a lot going on, and we're all needed. We need you. We need you to be the leader that you are called to be. And so this conversation with Stephen is my contribution to helping you get there. If you'd like to learn more about him, McGheeleadership.com. He has mostly private coaching sessions, but he does have one workshop coming up that runs at the end of January. So do check that out and truly appreciate what you know and who you are and what you could possibly be bringing into the world. As I said, you are needed. So please allow this conversation to support you, to think about how to step up, how to up your game. You're already out there doing stuff. How can you make it better, deeper, more authentic, more meaningful? We really, really, I'm going to keep saying it. We need you. We need you. All right. Enjoy this conversation. And don't forget to visit my friends at bondcharge.com, especially if you don't have an infrared light source in your life. I really do recommend getting a sauna blanket. It's a fun and easy way to correct the infrared light deficiency that most people are suffering from, especially if you live in a high latitude, or even if you live somewhere hot. If you're inside all the time, you're probably not getting enough infrared light. All right, that's it, everybody. Enjoy this episode. Lean into the new year and lean into your bigger self. See you soon. Stephen McGhee, welcome to the QBC podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Me too, Meredith. We've had a few touch-ins before, so it's really cool to be here with you.
Thank you. And a little thank you to our mutual godfather, Peter Bort. He's
Love
always
that man.
Sprinkling lovely people into my life. Thanks, Peter. All right, so let's start with your story and how you came to be where you are, which is as a leadership coach and a coach to highly successful people. You've led people up mountains and down rapids and spoken on stages, but you started out in a much more traditional role in life in a corporate environment. How did that journey unfold to where you are now?
Well, we'll do the short version, Meredith, and
Okay.
then if you want to dive deeper into any of the specifics of it, we can do that. But like a lot of us listening, I grew up with meager beginnings. My mother reared four kids on her own, and she was going out trying to make a living. So sometimes she was waiting tables at night. We were living off of whatever tips she had as a cocktail waitress, etc. So we didn't have much. So there was, to begin with, just the mindset I had some limitations in it. Like, I don't know how anyone ever could do this or that or this or that based on the mindset I had, because there was just a lot of things we couldn't afford due to the limited resources. So I mentioned that to you because it put into my heart and mind that, oh, I just think money would solve all my problems as a young man. So I made it through school. That's a longer story. I did get a degree in business administration and finance. And somehow, some way, I think because I interviewed well, fast forward through college to my first job in the financial services and banking industry. And I spent many years climbing the corporate ladder. And at some point, maybe I'm 4 to 5 years in this corporate climbing of the ladder, I get asked to be on what we call the succession plan at a large financial services organization underneath Nations Bank. And so I was learning a lot about leadership, but I was also learning a lot about how people operated in the boardroom, meaning how the operations went, how the conversations went, how the communications went. And there was so much of it that I didn't like. Like, it felt like we were out of integrity and that we were doing things to just get the deal. In the midst of all that, Meredith, I was doing a lot of entertaining to get the deal because money costs are all the same. For those of you that understand a little bit about financial services, investment banking industry, all the money cost is the same. So how do you really get a deal? You get a deal because you're really good at business development or getting clients through entertainment. So I did a lot of traveling. I was really good at the game of politics in corporate America. I ate out almost every night. There was a lot of alcohol involved and a high degree of stress. Like, I remember one night in particular, Meredith, where I was trying to go to sleep at night and my body was just pouring sweat from the stress. Like, I was soaking my
Oh,
sheets. I would wake up like at 2 a.m. and I couldn't go back to sleep. And my body was inflamed and I was way out of touch with nature, which I know we're going to talk about later. My circadian rhythm was way out of whack. My body was way out of whack. So long story short, I end up sick with a blood clot in my left arm, and it was about 9 to 10 inches long. And I was so afraid of what was happening with the swelling, and it was blue, and all of that, that I just avoided it. I ignored it until one night we were sitting at dinner with my family, and my sister-in-law said, "You really should get that checked." And so it scared me enough that night that I went straight to the emergency room at Swedish Medical Center in Denver, Colorado. And within a few minutes, they've determined that I've got this blood clot. And I don't know, Meredith, how much you know about blood clots, but they're they're painful, but they can be very dangerous
yeah.
because it breaks off and it can travel to a major organ and they can kill you. So I ended up in intensive care, and I was in intensive care for 8 days, which is like a lot of things in life. It was horrific and a blessing all in the same breath. One of the blessings was I survived, that I actually lived through it. Because 8 days in intensive care means, we're really
Yeah,
worried,
especially when you just walked in after dinner.
especially because I just
Hey,
walked
thought I'd
after
get this
dinner.
checked out. 8 days in intensive care later. Wow, it's
It's
good. It's good
crazy.
you went in.
It's really good I went in for many reasons, but the real linchpin for me wasn't about me. It was about a man who had come in from a motorcycle accident. He was in intensive care in a bed next to me. And if you've ever been in intensive care in most hospitals, you're separated not by a room, but by a curtain. So I'm again awake in the middle of the night and I can hear this man who I don't know, but I can hear his pain. I can hear his suffering. But most impactful was I heard his breathing start to slow down. And eventually he took his last breath. And I heard it. I heard the sigh. It's almost as if I could feel his spirit leaving his body.
Wow.
And it was, and eventually, everyone comes running in and they try to resuscitate, but they don't. The man passes. And in that moment, Meredith, I made a decision, so many decisions about my life. And the rest of the story continues from there. But in that moment, I was like, I am not freaking doing what I've been doing. I am not wasting one precious moment of this beautiful thing called life doing anything that I don't really believe in or that I don't really want to be doing. So I don't believe in obligation. I believe in commitments. And that's the short version, Meredith. I don't want to be just talking straight through our time because I know you have a lot of questions and a lot to insert into this. But that's the basic start of my of my moving into the world of leadership advisement, which I've been doing now for 30 years.
Wow. It's interesting to me because, a lot of people could have that experience, but not have that outcome. Do you feel that you were primed for that in some way or working toward it?
I
And then when
I
the
think
moment arrived, it was like you were
maybe,
open?
I mean, I knew I couldn't, and maybe your listeners can appreciate this. When we are on a path, when I am on a path that I know I can't sustain, I know that there's something I want or must change. But sometimes I wait until I get thrown down the stairs to get the message. Can you
I
hear what
can
I'm
relate.
saying? It's like, well, everyone out there ought to be raising their hand right now because
Hands
it's
up.
like being human, and then hopefully we get wise. Hopefully we get some wisdom along the way to go, no, these are signs that I'm off track. I'm off journey. I'm off path. My soul isn't happy. Physically, emotionally, mentally, I'm out of whack and I want to do something about that. So, no, at that time in my life, I wouldn't have. But that was like being thrown down 20 staircases in 8 days, and it woke me up. It had me be aware of what I was doing.
Wow. And when you work with people, because I think there's also this idea that um, sometimes in order to wake up, we have to make all of these drastic changes in our lives. I know you work now as a coach to people who work, in the corporate world or in the financial world, and they like it. It kind of works for them. And I just want to talk about the idea of being attuned to what does or doesn't work for you, for you. Like you were saying, you could tell that the life you were living was not aligned. It was not working. How do you open it up for people to understand if there's some periphery changes that need to be made or if they're truly on the wrong path? Because I guess what I'm getting at is I think sometimes we have this idea like, oh, if I want to grow spiritually, I can't be in the corporate world or I can't have this type of job. And I'm not sure that that's true, but it is true that it has to be working for you. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's such a beautiful, beautiful question. And the last thing I would want to convey today is that the corporate world is wrong for everyone. There are some company cultures that are flat out toxic. And
Right.
in those toxic cultures, people have to make their individual unique choices about how they navigate all of that. There are some people that really thrive in the job I was doing. They really would thrive. I wasn't built for it. So I think the key
Yeah.
is know thyself. Like back to
Right.
Shakespeare, like you really want to know who you are and you really want to pay attention to the signs and the symptoms. I think sometimes, and with my clients, they might have an overwhelm or they might, be feeling like they're eating out too much or they're away from their family too much or whatever the case might be. Those can be small, incremental, and nuanced adjustments where a person has to be able to set clear boundaries with the culture, with their direct reports, with the chairman of the board or whatever it is. And that's where I come in and really support people in saying, speak your truth. In leadership, that's everything because integrity in leadership is so highly important to being effective that if a person is lying to themselves, they're probably lying to other people. So this is where it can be, to answer your question more specifically, it might be small adjustments that support a person in thriving in an environment because they set some clear boundaries about I'm not going to every entertaining dinner every night and drinking 4 drinks. I'm just not that's not for me at this time in my life and I'm setting clear boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah, that really makes
That
sense.
makes
And I
sense.
think, yeah, absolutely. Because I think sometimes we get the idea and then it's like, okay, well, especially let's say if you're a practitioner or you think, okay, well, I have to own my own business. But again, not everyone is built to own a business. Sometimes, I think it's fine to be an employee or to work for someone else. And it's like being able to, yeah, suss out what is going to work for me versus what I think I'm supposed to be doing based on what I've somehow been influenced to think.
Yeah, I think people can find fulfillment in a lot of different ways. I think a person just has to be aligned with themselves in such a way that they're living into some form of their truth so that they're not wearing themselves out day in and day out because that's just not sustainable. And it's not result oriented either. I mean, you can argue that it doesn't feel good, but the greater argument is when people don't have discretionary energy, creative, generative energy in their world, they typically don't feel that fulfilled. So a lot of this is, as I said earlier, it's sustained, nuanced changes where a person let's look at one specific example. Like I've been in organizations where there's 3 minute response time. It's not a mandate, but it's like 3 minute response time on email is what's common. So instead of working on your project, you're working on responding to an email because you're in the thread, but it isn't productive. So those are changes that can be made extrinsically that help a person to be more settled intrinsically.
Right. I love what you just said, discretionary energy. That is a good phrase. Say more about that because so many of us come into like the health and healing space due to energy deficits. And I know for myself, I spend my energy like a credit card in overdraft. So I'm
You
really
do better,
interested.
Meredith.
I'm interested. I love this idea of discretionary energy. Say more about that.
Well, I mean, just imagine it's an overflow, like you're filled up. On a quantum biology level, your cells are charged, right?
Right.
And you've got some room when that happens to live fully and to stay well. Like immunity's up, cognitive function's up, all those kinds of things are jamming. So discretionary energy, when I speak about it in leadership, is it's like, your workforce is doing what they need to do, but even more because they want to. And this is when we are fully alive. It's like when you can be in the presence of someone that's that filled up, it's like a joyful encounter because they're not holding back. And unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, people are just doing as little as they possibly can to get by because they're just trying to get to the weekend. They
Right.
start on Monday and they talk about the weekend, and then they get to Wednesday and they're talking about what they're going to do the next weekend instead of really feeling fulfilled and generating through creativity in their work, whatever the work is. And it doesn't need to be fancy work, it can be any kind of thing where a person's like, I'm going to give this my all today because they
Right.
can, because they want to, they're willing to, but they know that they can.
Right. Yeah. And I think this is one of the reasons that I was really excited to do this interview because we can get all of our inputs correct, so to speak, and optimize our circadian rhythms and eat well and do our outdoor time and go for walks. But if the way that we've structured our life is taking our energy or not in alignment with who we are, we're still fighting the flow in some, so to speak. Like, I don't know, maybe you can hear what I'm trying to ask better than I can ask it. But it's like there are pieces beyond, beyond just setting everything up to be healthy. There are pieces in terms of how we make decisions, how we live our lives, like what you were just saying, that are still going to put us in that energy deficit, are still going to work against our intrinsic ability to be healthy
Yeah.
if we don't understand how to look at those things as well.
Yeah, so I've listened to your podcast a number of times. I love the ones I've listened to. Your guests really resonate with me. I'm learning so much from you, Meredith, and from your guests. But one thing I think we all agree on, and how I say it, is what's normal isn't normal. So we think it's normal to wake up tired. We think it's normal to barely get through the day. We think it's normal for these maladies, and I don't need to list them because you've got plenty of guests that can list more of them than I could, but just obesity, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune problems are not normal at the level that we're seeing them. And you've had lots of podcasts where people state the stats, on that stuff. So I go, first thing we got to do is wake up and go, what I'm experiencing as exhaustion isn't normal, and that my body can realign with the proper principles and protocols of quantum biology. And it's so powerful. And I would say, Meredith, nobody's exempt from that. So if there's someone out there going, yeah, but you don't know how hard I've tried and you don't know how sick I really am, I would say believing is seeing. And we live in a world that makes that really hard because we live in a world that is seeing is believing. So if seeing is believing, you watch the commercials and you start to believe that what? A pill from a pharmaceutical company with 15 really bad side effects is better to take because you've got eczema or something like that. And so these things are not normal. And I think it's time for all of us as leaders to stand up and say, bullshit. This is not normal. We do not need to live this way as a collective, and we can come together in alignment and support a movement, if you will, for well being. And I feel just very strongly about that as a leadership advisor because people with big visions cannot accomplish those great visions without that discretionary energy. It's just not going to happen. It's not possible. They have all the best. Willpower is overrated. Can you hear that? What when I say
Yeah.
that? How do you hear that, Meredith? Willpower is overrated. The whole world's about willpower. Force it, make it happen. Go on YouTube, but not that kind of motivational stuff is just not right. At least in my heart, because at some point I did willpower before I ended up in intensive care. Where it put me, it put me
That's where willpower, all willpower all the time got you.
eventually it will get most of us in a bad situation,
Yeah,
even if it's a bad relationship.
right. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you on the willpower because it's finite.
Mm,
It's a finite resource I found. So if it's the only thing I have, if it's the only tool I have to do what I'm supposed to be doing or to do what's good for me or best for me, sooner or later it's going to fail. Like
yeah.
I need more tools in the toolkit. And especially because we were saying earlier about getting thrown down the stairs, right? It's like sometimes I'm motivated by pain. The pain goes away, my motivation goes away. If and that willpower to get out of the pain is not enough to create a sustainable life where I don't keep ending up in that pain, whether it's emotional pain through a relationship or physical pain because you know, I'm not doing the things that I need to do to keep my body healthy.
Yeah.
There has to be some other blueprint, some other driving force besides the willpower.
Yeah, so then the effective question becomes, what is that driving force?
What is it? What is it, Stephen?
Well, I, 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 I think the most important attribute to great leadership is different than what a lot of people would say. I think the greatest attribute to great leadership, and we'll talk in a moment about what does leadership even mean, but it's listening. And I don't just mean that I can have an ability to listen to you, Meredith, and hear what you say based on the content or but the context of what you share. Like that's hugely important. But the listening I'm talking about is how good are you as a leader, Meredith, or any practitioner listening, or myself, Stephen McGhee? How good am I at listening to myself? How good am I at listening to, for those of us that are spiritual, how good am I at listening to source? How good am I at listening to spirit? How good am I at listening to the wisdom of what I know is true for me, even though people outside of me think it should be different or I should be doing it differently? And that's a self-referential skill that I've worked on my entire life because I didn't grow up that way. I grew up trying to please people and make other people happy to my own demise. So I think that's one of the keys to this great question that we're pondering together.
Wow. Yeah. So, yes, because if a person is able to listen to their inner truth, let's say, and act on that, it would feel to me like that makes them a leader, irrespective of what their situation in life is, whether they have a job title that implies that or not. But that ability to live from that kind of truth, like, just naturally puts you in a leadership position. Would you
Yeah.
say?
Well, I would say that is really close to aligned with what I would say. I would say that first of all, yeah, job title means nothing. Job title, whether I'm a doctor or I'm not a doctor, or I'm a CEO, or I'm a mid-level manager, or I'm an administrative, or I'm a mom, or I'm a stay-at-home dad. Leadership is not about a title. In overarching simplicity, leadership, by definition, is the positive influence of another. So if I can positively influence another in my way of being as a leader, it has nothing to do with title. And so I have had in the past clients and some now who I'm like, hey, dude, sis, lead up. Like you think you're stuck and that you can't positively influence upward in the organization or sideways in the organization or down in the organization. It's nothing to do with title and everything to do with willingness to be a leader. So for all of our listeners, it's like if you have technology, skills, scientific information, principles, and protocols that can serve this planet, and you are not sharing them, I would challenge you today to say it doesn't matter your title. And I would say go for it because you will find, I will find, we will all find discretionary energy when we share. Sharing is a key to leadership. So, how do you hear all that, Meredith? How does that
Oh,
line up?
I love that. I love that because as I was saying to you before we came on, what I really hope, what I really wanted for people to hear was that, yeah, if you're like involved in health and wellness, if you're listening to this podcast, if you know what quantum biology is, you have really important information. And I feel like sometimes people get caught like, oh, well, I'm not as smart as that guest, or I don't know as much as that person, or I don't know. And I wanted, I really wanted you to come on because I want people to hear from in the strongest possible terms that what you have to offer matters.
Absolutely. And you are a piece of the puzzle. You matter. I love what you just said, Meredith, because I think sometimes people can take themselves out of the game. And it's like, get off the sidelines and get in the game. You might not be the quarterback of the, sorry for the sports metaphor, but
It's all
you
good.
might not be the team captain. But what you offer is unique and it's not complete until you offer it. Even if I mean, this is the funniest thing. Like, I've seen this in organizations for years, like the quiet ones. When I go in, they're the first ones I'm asking questions to. You want to know why? Because they're great observers and they see all kinds of shit other people don't see. And they can speak it so clearly, but they don't get asked. So you may never get asked you might be going, yeah, I'm that person. I'm the one observing. I'm the one that can see things. But then I say, okay, it's incumbent upon you to build that muscle of sharing, to build that muscle of speaking your truth clearly and succinctly and powerfully. You will be heard because a lot of people just run around the flower pot speaking. They don't often say anything. So we
Right.
all have a gift to share. And one of the things I would hope would come from our being together today, Meredith, or the magic of you and me doing this together, would be that someone out there would get sparked into the trueness of who they are and start leading. But leading doesn't mean telling. See, people think it means telling. Another great skill in leadership isn't telling, it's asking. I spend most of my day asking questions. This is more talking than I normally do in any given hour because you having me as a guest and you're asking me questions. But normally I'm asking questions, and questions can also be a great form of leadership.
And then what do you do? What's next? What else?
Listen, listen. So, again, most people are listening for what I call agreement. So there might even be guests out there right now listening for agreement. It's fine. It's not a judgment. Like, what do I think about Stephen saying? Is he true? Is it accurate? Is it 100% my experience? Well, no, it's never going to be. But I say, why would you listen for agreement when you could listen for alignment? Like, what do we really have in common as a collective? Speaking of quantum biology, what a beautiful name, the Quantum Biology Collective. Because we have different, we're going to have different opinions on different things, especially in this field of quantum biology, because it's emerging. But there's also a lot of things we can all agree on, that we can align on. And that's where we're powerful. We're powerful when we're aligned. And I'm not going political here, but I'm just going to say that one of the biggest problems we see in corporations, one of the biggest problems we see in our country, one of the biggest problems we see in the world is people are listening for agreement. And when they listen for agreement, they hear something they don't believe in, and now they're ready to fight. And when they're ready to fight, we've created resistance. And when we've created resistance, there's no coming together. Mother Teresa said it best. She said, I am not against war. I am for peace. That's nuanced leadership. So people out there like against things, like being against Western medicine is one example. I'm not against Western medicine. I'm for functional medicine based in quantum biology. And that's what I would speak to if I ever had enough knowledge to do it. I know enough to be dangerous on that topic, but it's because of your guests that I've learned it. I want them to hear that. I've applied stuff from what Peter shared with me, who I adore as a leader. Peter's a great leader because he's a great listener. Would you agree?
I would agree. Yeah.
So, but he's also, when you ask him, hey, what are the 10 things you do to build your energy system? Well, he can go there. He can go there, and he's helped me apply it. So those are all examples of what our topic is today, leadership.
Yeah. And I'm really interested in this idea of listening for agreement, because it's something I wasn't thinking of it in those terms, but I think it's kind of similar that I was thinking about recently. It's sort of like the operating system under whatever it is, whatever else is going on. So I can have, you gave a great example of not being against Western medicine, being for something else. And so would an example of like listening for agreement be, I'm listening to, say, a podcast or an interview or some, person in the media talk about something to do with health and wellness. And I'm like, yep, they're correct. Yep, that's correct. Oh, they don't know about this. I'm not listening to them anymore. Or, oh, they said that, but I don't think that's right. So I'm not right. And we kind of, I was thinking of it as like almost like a purity test, right? They're like, oh, and so we sort of push that person aside or push everything that they said to one side and put them in a bucket of like, I don't need to pay attention to that person because they didn't tick all my boxes. Is that like the kind of thing you're talking about? And like when we come in through that lane that we're missing out, there is a different way we could be listening to get value from that person, even if we disagree on a few things?
For sure, Meredith. I mean, you've summarized it beautifully. It's like you're shooting yourself in the head. So why not have an attitude where I'm going to listen for what I'm aligned with, and I'm just going to leave the rest behind. Now, I don't know about you, but my favorite 3 words these days are I don't know. But those were not words I used 20 years ago very often. Like 30 years ago, I knew everything. 20 years ago, I started to realize I didn't know that much, but I thought I knew certain things were irrefutable. Now I don't know anything. And you know why? Because now I'm open to the possibility that I could be wrong. And when I'm open to that possibility that I could be wrong, I can hear things and I learn more and I can apply more. So I think it's a very interesting time to be having this conversation because there's just so much divisiveness in all kinds of areas. It's not just politically, it's the world at large is kind of in an argument.
Yes. Yeah, no. And what made me think of that, and this is like a really nice framework for approaching it differently, is that I was on the Twitter and there was some activists who are doing work around getting toxins out of food, and it's very much focused on processed food and improving the food supply. And then there were some other people on Twitter who were like, uh, it's all about light. You're so stupid that you're not even covering the light story. You don't even know what you're talking about. And I just thought, oh gosh,
Right.
I'm not sure that's really helping where we want to go. I mean, there was someone doing great work in an area that needs it, and that lens, like that was just like listening for hard agreement. And I just feel like there's so much change that's about to happen that could be happening. Like, and you're giving me a really nice framework for thinking about that. So it's like listening for the alignment. Where are we aligned?
Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful. I think we're in a very interesting time on the planet where we're going to start to see a more positive shift through leadership in that direction. And that's why I'm banging my sharing drum today about leadership. 30 years of being in the field, the leadership space, and it's increasing. There's oftentimes a breakdown before a breakthrough. So let's hope that we're starting to move for the breakthrough, for the
Yeah.
positive solutions for a greater good for the entire planet.
And I want to get into the shifts that are happening. I want to get into that a little bit more, actually. So I'm glad you raised it. But before we do that, what are some other misconceptions or myths that you feel that people have about the idea of leadership?
Oh my God, we need 4 or 5 more hours. I think the biggest, I'm going to simplify something complicated. So I know that I want you all to know I'm oversimplifying something complicated, but I think there's still value in what I would share here, which is the first law of leadership is take care of yourself.
Mm.
And breathe that in. Like let that camp in your heart and your body. Let it fill your cells. Take care of yourself. The biggest misnomer of leadership is that you give yourself away all day long and eventually there's nothing left to give. And then we have a leader that's not living through discretionary energy. We have a leader that's sick. And we have a leader that has a great vision and maybe great wisdom and skills, but they're not able to offer it. So take care of yourself so that you can serve others. And so I work with a lot of people in that way. They can't see it. I have blind spots in my life. I don't know if you do, Meredith, but I have blind spots. And I can't see them as they're blind spots. So the reflection of coaching, you're a great coach. You coach people. By coaching people, you can reflect back what they may not see themselves. And so I believe in guiding and advising and coaching for that reason, because often nobody tells the leader what they can't see.
Right.
So I know that's overbroad, but is that kind of
Yeah,
helpful?
absolutely. And that could be, I mean, you were almost like describing a lot of moms when you, in that, in the way that you explained it, right? It's like, or even just parents or caregivers in general, I got to give and give and give and give and give until I drop.
Yeah.
Or people in the helping professions prioritizing clients over self-care over and over and over, because that feels like that's what we think it means to serve, but you're saying something really different.
Yeah, I think what you're bringing up with practitioners and moms. I've never been a mom, but I watched, and I know my own mom was that way. So I think that's a really good example, and I also think it's another great example of doctors who care so much about their patients they forget about themselves. But we all know it's just like anything. I don't want to walk into a doctor's office and look at somebody that's ill, that's giving me advice about my own wellness. I that's not believable to me. That's not authentic to me. So I think if you're one of those people, it's like, what would I need to do to come into balance? How could I shift my practice in such a way that I can take care of myself and serve people more fully? And I've heard some of your guests talk about new business models that can support that. And it's brilliant. That's what is changing in that area. But through leadership, anything is possible in those ways. Like we're just all going to have to get out of our comfort zone and start looking at solutions that we didn't think of last year.
Right. Okay. So listening for alignment over listening for agreement, taking care of ourselves as a form of leadership, that is really powerful, right? Because I think so many of us struggle with that idea. It's like, oh, well, if I'm going to take care of myself, that's not selfish exactly, but certainly to the side of my leadership responsibilities. And yeah, it's really powerful for you to say, no, that's not the right way around.
Well, you just said the most important. You said the most important word in our language for leadership, and that is the word no. And I say to my clients, clear boundaries are not barriers to the heart. So people think that saying no is a bad thing in some way. But again, I said earlier, obligations are overrated. You know, we're seeing this online now. Overrated, underrated. Have you seen some of these?
Yeah.
Old thermogenesis is underrated, overrated, and then the specialist goes on and says about why. Like it's fun. I love it. But saying no is underrated. Taking care of self is underrated.
Right. Okay. What are some other ways for us to think about leadership that we're probably not doing?
The power of leadership is far reaching. So you're leading us in this podcast. Thank you for doing the podcast because you have guests that come on. It takes energy, time, yeah, yada 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 to prepare to get there and to put it out. Here's the thing about leadership: when it's coming from a clear intention of service, leadership is far reaching. You will have no idea, Meredith, who will listen to this, who will then take something from it and go share it with their family or go share it with their patient or go share it with a stranger on the street or share it at Thanksgiving dinner or a holiday dinner. It's far reaching. Who's going to share this podcast with 5 of their friends because there's 2 or 3 things in it that are valuable? So do not underestimate your power as a leader, as you share, as you come into the alignment of what we're talking about here today. It's just it's evolution. Leadership is an evolution that we have a shared opportunity in together. There's an opportunity for us to share, and that's more powerful than we think.
Right. Right. And you were saying earlier about cultivating the ability to trust yourself and trust your inner knowing and trust guidance from source. And I saw in some of your writing, you talked about personal sovereignty and its relationship to leadership.
Yeah.
How do you support people to cultivate that? Especially, in this world, like we think a lot of things are true that most people don't think are true. And it's based on research and understanding, and so we've come to it like in a real organic way, and it's real and true for us, but it does take a certain degree of you know that ability to cultivate that personal sovereignty, and it can be I don't know, tricky, lonely. How do you support people to get okay living their lives that way when a lot of the
Wow.
time we're expected to capitulate to the more dominant voices or what everyone else thinks, what everyone
Yeah.
else says.
Yeah. Boy, this is one that comes out of the memory bank, but I think it will be the most efficient answer to your great question. I'll see what you think. But many of your listeners have listened to, I recommend if they haven't read the book, A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Brilliant, brilliant book, and well known mainstream book that has a lot of wisdom in it. The piece of wisdom in it that I would speak to today is the distance from stimulus to response. So, why would I mention that today? Because most people don't have any distance from a trigger, an activation. They get blamed for something. There's stimulus, and then we immediately respond based on familiar patterns. Can you hear that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, the practice of illumination, of great leadership, of better listening, of all the things we've talked about today is to put a gap and a distance between stimulus and response. So I'm going to ask you a personal question. When you feel activated, like you might be, someone says something to you like, oh, Meredith, you're just dumb, and or whatever the situation is, where do you feel it in your body when you're activated or when you react?
Probably most often in my gut, like
Okay.
seizes up, like your stomach drops, like that feeling.
Yeah, okay, good. Mine starts in the gut, moves up to the solar plexus, and eventually I can feel my head starting to get heated, like I'm
Yeah.
moving to my head.
Yes.
So that is a beautiful thing. If you as a listener today to the podcast, you can get familiar with where you're activated. It's a sign to do what? Slow down. Create a distance between stimulus and response. You don't have to send the email or the text right now. You don't have to even reply. You could even say, "Listen, I'm a little that pissed me off. I need a few minutes." So we'll start to retrain the brain. Truly, we have the science. I haven't heard as much from your podcast. Maybe it's somewhere in the archives, but neuroplasticity is a real thing. We can retrain it, but we have to give it room to rewire. We have to move in the direction of what we prefer. Earlier, I said familiar patterning. So I don't want my familiar patterns running my life, subconsciously or otherwise. So somewhere in there, I got to get the gap. And in the gap, I take a breath. And in that breath, I make a new choice and I stay sovereign. And if I can stay sovereign, then I can be whole. And if I can be whole, I can respond more fully from a place of alignment instead of reaction and start a fight that now explodes and goes down the rabbit hole into a whole host of cascading problems. So oftentimes pausing is good. And that's what Viktor Frankl brought to us in that book, A Man's Search for Meaning. I mean, he did it more than a moment. He did it for days and weeks and months and I think years on end. But he turned to the most horrific extrinsic situation in Auschwitz, in a concentration camp, being vilified and attacked and treated horribly with very little food and sickness all around him, watching his friends perish. He turned even that into a sovereign situation. So that's an extreme example. I hope for most people listening, I mean, it's extreme. But so that's the practice, though. And your willingness to practice is the key. Starting today. It's a simple thing. Small things done consistently make major impact. There's a quote. It's not mine. I don't know who said it, but I use it all day, every day. Little things make major changes.
Right.
So those are kind of my thoughts on personal sovereignty.
Yeah, that's really deep. That I hadn't ever thought of it that way. The ability to create the space that you need to stay in your
own experience without causing a chain reaction, but also without denying your own experience.
Yeah, you're not shoving your feelings. You're
Yeah.
not stuffing it. You're pausing. And in that pause, you might even ask the question, what's the best solution here? So again, that kind of brings in the thing I was talking earlier about asking. Like you can ask yourself generative questions. Albert Einstein was famous for that. He didn't ask a lot of people because he was too smart for most people. He asked himself, how can I find a solution to this? What's the, way forward with this? And then give those things room to incubate. Give those questions that pause, that space between stimulus and response, time for a new solution rather than an old familiar one that has an automatic reoccurring dialogue to it. I know I'm throwing out some leadership language today, but automatic reoccurring dialogue is something everyone can relate to. It's because we've said the same thing so many times. It's a pattern. Doesn't mean it's the right thing to say again.
Right.
So it gives us room for that source, for the spirit to come in as well. Like for those of us listening that believe in something like that, like all day long when I'm working with people, I will pause and say, give me a minute. And then I listen and then I respond. And sometimes my response is, I don't know.
Right. But I would imagine that generates trust, right? Like if you are willing to tell me when you don't know, then when you tell me what you think to be true, I'm more likely to believe you.
It would for me. It would for me if someone just said, I'll get back to you or I don't know. It would for me. Yeah.
Right. These are just, yeah, I keep using the word powerful, but it really is, I think, to integrate these approaches into our lives. Because as I was saying before, like there are so many layers and levels. Um, and there's, healing our physical selves and healing our trauma. But then there's like, okay, now we're ready to live life. Now we're ready to, as you say, get in the game. So now what are the tools and strategies? I need to cultivate an identity as a leader in the game, and not as a sick person or not as a struggling person or a traumatized person or this or that. It's like I'm a sovereign person now, ready to engage with the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and Meredith, I would say again, I'll simplify a more complicated topic, but I think your listeners can walk away with um, the idea that in leadership, maybe identity is less important. What my identity is less important than who am I being in this moment.
Mm.
Like we're so caught up in doing, and believe me, actions are important. We all know that, but that gets back to will, that gets back to force, that gets back to I know I need to take action on the physical level to make good things happen. But what most people don't take into account is who would you need to be to make that happen. Who would you need to be in your next um, patient, in your next meeting with a patient? When a patient walks in, who would you need to be to heal that person? Who would you need to be? Who would I need to be to get an idea or a vision across to a chairman who can't currently see that the current vision is causing problems and cascading problems? Who would I need to be? And I would say that 1,000 times, because who you would need to be is known through this space of listening. It's known in the sovereignty of your soul. Who you need to be can happen in a holy instant. It can happen right now. So it's not a lot of work. So people go, well, I need to work on being a leader. I go, no, you don't. You need to be a leader right now. Be a better listener starting today at home with your child. what would that do in your life? It would give momentum and velocity to the trajectory of your leadership. Can you hear that?
Yes.
It's simple, but it's so powerful. I'll be doing a keynote in January on the power of deep listening at a conference in Arizona. And I can't wait to do it because so much of what I'm going to talk about is presence pays. We live in a world where, and I'm not knocking professional sports, I love sports. People getting paid millions of dollars a game to throw a ball. Great, I love that. But what if one day we get paid through who we're being as a doctor, as a practitioner, as a leader? Presence pays. I think we're going to see that one day. And that's a hope and a dream on my part. But I feel it in my bones because I'm surrounding myself with more and more people that get what you get, that get that that what seems so intangible is actually real, that it actually matters who we're being.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And there's the question, who do I need to be
Mm-hmm.
in order to, fill in the blank? Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, so you mentioned a little earlier, and this is where I kind of wanted to end, about sort of, we've been talking a lot about personal, going deep inside, and how to move forward in an effective way in the world. What do you see happening on a wider level in terms of, and even just, I don't know what words you use to articulate it, shifts in consciousness, planetary changes? I leave it open to you, but I know that you pay attention, and I would love to know what you see, what you're seeing, and where you feel that we are.
I'm going to share a quick contextual story. I'll make it very brief. And when we were in 2020, and I knew that COVID was coming, I did what's called Gestalt therapy, and I did it with COVID. And for those of us that don't know what Gestalt is, it's simply you find an aspect inside of yourself. It could be sadness, it could even be a pain you have, it could be thoughts you have, and you take that aspect outside of you and you have a conversation with it. So COVID wasn't something I had at the time, but it was something I wanted to talk to. I wanted to find out, why is COVID here? So I had a conversation as if COVID could talk. And I literally went from my chair to COVID's chair, and I learned a lot from COVID. Like, what could I learn from COVID being here on the planet? And so that's an example of where I think we're heading. Where we're heading is there will be continued challenges. But these challenges that we are facing as a humanity are not challenges that we cannot overcome. Does that mean it'll be easy? No. Does it mean that we'll be able to do things the way we always have? Here's the answer. No, it won't. It will mean we need to think at a higher level of consciousness, a more service oriented level of consciousness to find the solution. So the answer in leadership is use everything that occurs in your day, in your life, in your business, in your relationships for your advancement. Use everything that occurs for your advancement. It's like, why is this in our world? So that we can adjust, so that we can evolve, so that we can come together in alignment and find solutions we can't currently see. To do that, we have to be in relationship with the planet. We have to be in relationship with nature. We have to be in relationship with ourselves before we can be in relationship with other people. So some people are moving in a different direction. They're moving into fear. They're moving into againstness. They're moving into separation from nature, from other people that don't agree with them. This is not the direction for the solution. That's the direction to the past. We've already had the past. So the future, I think that's your question. What can we expect? We can expect more challenges, but we can expect that with the other things that are happening on the planet, including AI, it's a great example of what could be used against us or it could be used for us. So in leadership, I'd say get your intentions clear, find your sovereignty, and use it to lead and share. Use it to lead and share because there will be lots of opportunities for all of us to lead. It's it's everywhere, the possibilities of leadership everywhere we go. You could be at a coffee shop and be doing something, being some way that could shift the direction of somebody's day. So how do you hear all that, Meredith? I said a lot to your question, but was there something in there that
Yeah.
landed for you in terms of our
Well,
future?
yeah. I mean, I think what I'm really experiencing is just what you're saying. There is a lot of change, and what we know, what we're familiar with, might not necessarily work going forward. So we cannot afford to not step into our leadership. Like it's time. It's needed. All of all of you are needed. All of us are needed. And that's, I think, probably always been true, but I feel like it's extra true right now.
I think it's extra true too. And I want to coin a phrase you just said. It's worth repeating. All of us are needed. Like some of us are sitting on the sideline. It's like it's more fun to be in the game anyway. I know what it's like to sit on the sideline. I've done some isolation time in my life, existential crises, that kind of thing, where I'm like, I'm just out.
Yeah.
Fuck it. Like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like,
Forget
I'm not
this.
playing anymore. I just got hit too hard. I'm out. But I've learned from those times, and inner strength comes from those times. So if you're someone sitting there going, yeah, I've been contemplating how I can re engage, it's time. You said it. You said it so beautifully. It's time. If not now, then when is the thing.
Yeah. And it's, I just have this sense. I was doing some research for a presentation, going through looking at different theories of cyclical nature of history and the economy, and then looking at cosmology and different philosophies. And it just seemed that every single one of them was pointing to this moment as a moment of, the words that came up the most were upheaval and innovation.
Yeah.
and change.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
And so, yeah, that can feel scary. So the tools and the wisdom that you have shared today, I think, are just so important. So important, because we can know a whole bunch of stuff, and but if we're not, as you said, if we're not sharing it, if we're holding ourselves back, then it's like I don't know, almost like it might get stuck. Like the wisdom wants to go out and reach other people.
Yeah, and there's another side to this coin I want to mention because
Okay.
I know a number of people. I'm thinking of one person in particular who is so freaking smart and is so right about so many things that he shares on the planet. But this particular person has an arrogance that causes resistance. So there's someone doing the sharing, but from who are they being? They're being arrogant. And
Right.
if I'm being arrogant about what I'm sharing, then there might be some that get past that because they're just skilled at getting past that. Like I said earlier, you can take the message and leave the rest behind. Like it's, what is the old saying? It's the message, not the messenger. Like I'm pretty good at that, but some people aren't. So this person I'm thinking of are these people that are so highly arrogant would be heard by so many more people if they would consider refining their way of being and becoming an even greater leader to communicate what they know. So, I don't know if there's anyone listening here that falls into that category, but I know at times in my life, I really had to refine my message through who I was being. So that's just for
true.
all
And that is, I think, a bit of a trap when you do have information and knowledge and understanding that is ahead of the curve. It can be tempting to feel that arrogance, right? Like, all those plebes. They haven't figured this out yet.
Those idiots they're wrong about this. And
it's true. I think I tend to attract the people who go the other way and get imposter syndrome. But yeah, that is definitely a booby trap to look out for on this journey. I'm glad you brought it up.
Thank you.
At the end of the day, we're all just here together, figuring it out as we go.
I think that's beautifully said. I know it's true for me.
Stephen, are there any last words that are on your heart or mind that you'd like to share?
I'm just grateful to have met you through Peter. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. You're sharing such meaningful, progressive work. So my final words aren't about leadership or anything other than the fact that you're doing it, and that you're being it, and that I appreciate that about you. It isn't easy leading, right? Isn't it? I don't know how you feel, but some days you might wake up and feel alone. You might wake up and feel isolated. I know there's days I have that, and those are the days that are most important for us as leaders to get together and support each other in staying in the game, so that it isn't so isolating and so lonely, to lead. And the biggest reason is really because we can, but I appreciate you and what you're doing. Those are my final words.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Well, same here. This work is really needed, and I'm glad we're all here together figuring it out. Thank you for your time today and for sharing everything.
Yeah.
And how can people find you?
McGhee, MCGHEE, leadership.com. I'll provide you links to put in the show notes for anybody that's interested in what I'm up to. There are a few things coming around the first of the year. So looking forward to those things.
Wonderful. Okay. So when this publishes, those will all be in there, and we can come and find you, and I will, I'll mention them in the intro as well, which I'll record.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, go to my website, put in your email, and I send out some written pieces. One of them's on discretionary energy. I'm happy to forward those to anybody interested.
Oh, perfect. Yes. All right. So sign up for Stephen's emails and get the wisdom in the printed word. All right. Thank you, Stephen. We'll have to do this again and continue to dive deep.
Thank you.
This has been the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. To find a practitioner who practices from this point of view, visit our directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. If you are a practitioner, definitely take a look at the Applied Quantum Biology Certification, a 6-week study of the science of the new human health paradigm and its practical application with your patients and clients. We also love to feature graduates of the program on this very podcast. Until next time, the QBC.